On one of the busiest corners of New York City, surrounded by honking horns, hurried footsteps, and the non-stop hum of the city that never sleeps, there was a presence so quiet it was almost invisible. A little girl, always sitting in the same spot on the cold sidewalk, with an old cloth draped across her lap. On it, she displayed her tiny creations, colorful handmade bracelets, simple and fragile, reflecting her own delicate nature. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She didn't say a single word. She only reached out her hand when someone approached, and dropped her gaze again when no one stopped. She was like a detail in the urban backdrop, ignored by thousands of distracted eyes. Just 7 years old, but her eyes, they carried the weight of someone who'd already lived a full life without ever being seen. Her hair was always tied back carelessly, and her clothes, oversized and dirty, showed small, touching signs of a child trying to look pretty. A broken plastic brooch, a faded ribbon pinned with care, a colorful sock with no match. Tiny attempts to remain visible, to not vanish completely. Every day, suited-up executives, women with shopping bags, teens with headphones, and rush tourists passed her by as if she didn't exist. But she was there, silent, persistent, waiting for what even she didn't know. Her name was Lila. A name no one knew, a face no one noticed, a presence no one acknowledged. Until that day. A sleek black car pulled up in front of her, its tinted windows and powerful engine making it stand out in that forgotten part of town. It was far too luxurious for the neighborhood. Elegant. Intimidating. A glaring contrast to everything around it. The window rolled down slowly, revealing the stern face of a man. Not just any man. Elijah Blake. 38 years old. Billionaire. CEO of one of the most powerful corporations in the world. A name that opened doors, that commanded respect, that was never ignored. Known for being cold, focused, always moving. But at that moment, he stopped. For the first time in a long time, he stopped. He sat there, staring. The silence between them felt almost sacred. Lila didn't stand. Didn't speak. She simply pushed one of her bracelets toward him. Green. With a single bead shaped like a star. Elijah stared at it for a few seconds. First the bracelet. Then her eyes. And in that instant, something inside him, something that had been locked away for decades, simply opened. He pulled out a wad of cash and placed it gently on the cloth. Then, without a word, took all the bracelets. She dropped her gaze again, as if the moment meant nothing. But to him it did. Elijah got back in the car and drove off. But her image stayed with him. That night, seated in his penthouse high above the city, surrounded by luxury and silence, all he could see was that little green bracelet lying on his desk. He couldn't explain it. Not even to himself. Why that simple trinket left him so restless. Why, between billion-dollar meetings and international deals, the image of a silent little girl on a dirty sidewalk refused to leave his mind. Maybe it was the quiet in her eyes. Maybe it was the way she offered the bracelet without expecting anything in return. But one thing was certain. She had touched a part of him he hadn't felt in years, maybe not since he was a child himself. That night, Elijah couldn't sleep. He tried to ignore it, tried to reason it away. But every time he closed his eyes, her face appeared, vivid and haunting. That empty stare. Her hair tied in a messy knot. Her worn-out clothes trying so hard to look presentable, as if she were fighting every day not to disappear. And that bracelet, small, fragile, colorful. Just like her. For the first time in years, he felt the need to do something. Not out of charity. Not for pride. But because of a pull he didn't understand, and maybe didn't want to understand. So, when the first light of dawn touched the Manhattan skyline, Elijah called his driver. He said he wanted to check something on the route. But deep down he knew. He had to see if she was still there, if she was okay. And there she was, in the same spot on the sidewalk, surrounded by the same indifferent scene. That same old cloth in her lap. The colorful bracelets spread out like small, silent cries for help. Quiet. Invisible to everyone but him. Elijah watched from the car window for a few moments. A tightness rose in his chest that he couldn't explain. As if something deep inside was being pulled, not by pity, but by recognition. By the pain of once being overlooked, even while surrounded by people. The driver waited for instructions, but Elijah said nothing. He just sat there, breathing, feeling something awaken inside him, something long buried. The ability to stop, to feel, to truly see someone. And that morning, without saying a word, Elijah knew something inside him had changed forever. This time, Elijah did something he had never done in his adult life. He crouched down. His knees, more accustomed to boardrooms and imported rugs, touched the dirty sidewalk as if it no longer mattered. He didn't speak. He didn't try to look kind. He simply held out his hand, slowly, like someone offering time to a person who's never had any. Lila looked at him in silence. And with the same calm that came from unspoken wounds, she placed another bracelet in his palm. Blue. Simple. With a single stitched letter in the center, L. Elijah held it for a moment, feeling the weight that little piece carried. For Lila? He wondered. But he didn't ask. He didn't want to break her silence. He just nodded, stood up, and returned to the car, the bracelet still in his hand. Back inside the vehicle, as he looked down at the small bag of bracelets, something caught his eye, a crumpled piece of paper, stuffed hastily between the items. Curious, he unfolded it. The handwriting was shaky and childlike, but clear. And the message, gut-wrenching. I don't like Sundays. That's when they lock me in the room. Elijah froze. The air left his lungs. He read it again and again, hoping he'd misunderstood. But he hadn't. It was real. Alive. A punch to the gut from a child who wasn't asking for help, just stating a truth, like someone who no longer believes in rescue. In the days that followed, Elijah returned. Again and again. He couldn't help it. It was as if a part of his soul had been left on that sidewalk with her. And with every new visit, Lila gave him a new bracelet and a new note. Short phrases. Bear. As if she already understood that the world had no patience for long stories. The other kids cry. I don't. They don't like crying. I like to draw, but I hide it. Laughing gets me punished. And the most devastating of all. If I disappear, it's not your fault. Elijah read each note with his heart in knots. Every phrase felt like staring into a dusty, forgotten mirror, reflecting a version of himself he'd left behind. The pain of rejection. The weight of being alone. The feeling of not belonging. And then he knew, he couldn't turn away anymore. He had to find out who Lila was. Where she came from. Who was taking care of her. And more importantly, why no one was doing anything to help her. He hired a private investigator. Gave him a clear order, find everything. Name, background, address, legal guardians. The report came back within 2 days, but it didn't bring relief. It brought outrage. Lila Marie Collins. 7 years old. Living in an unregulated home linked to a shady nonprofit, supposedly a temporary foster care program. On paper, everything looked legal. But what the reports described was masked abandonment. 3 transfers in under 2 years. No official complaints filed, yet. The so-called NGO received state funding to keep the house running, but in reality, it was nothing more than an overcrowded shelter where children became statistics. Food was rationed. Silence was enforced. Punishment was the norm. And affection? A luxury no one had ever seen. No dreams. No future. Elijah read every page. But it was the attached photos that truly broke him. Lila, curled up on a worn-out mattress pushed against a wall, sharing the tiny space with 5 other kids. No blankets. No toys. Not a shred of dignity. That was the moment Elijah felt something rise inside him, something stronger than business, than numbers, than reason, the urgency to protect. To rescue. But when he tried to act, he hit invisible walls. His attorneys, men used to solving problems with a few phone calls and the right signatures, got nowhere. Reports were dismissed with phrases like "everything is within the law." The nonprofit had political backing. The bureaucracy was a web, spun carefully to silence anyone who tried to intervene. Not enough evidence, they said. Alternative care methods, they claimed. Elijah, who had moved empires with a single signature, was suddenly powerless. But he didn't stop. Something had awakened in him, something Lila had unknowingly stirred. And for the first time, he chose to fight. Not for power. Not for profit. But for a little girl who didn't even know his last name, but had already filled the empty spaces inside him. He knew he couldn't save every child in the world. But this one, he had to save. On Monday, Elijah woke earlier than usual. He barely slept. He arrived at the street corner before the sun touched the pavement. He waited. Watched every passerby. Waited longer. Half an hour. 1 hour. 2. Then came the sinking feeling in his gut. Lila didn't show. Her spot was empty. The cloth was gone. No bracelets. No trace. As if she had never been there. As if she had been swept away by the same cruel wind of indifference that rushes down New York sidewalks every single day. Elijah kept waiting. More than hoping for her return, he was hoping for proof that there was still time. But that silence, that particular morning, felt different. It was the kind of silence that screams. And deep down, he knew, something had happened. Tuesday came. He returned. Walked the same street. Searched every inch of the sidewalk. Still nothing. By Wednesday, restless and anxious, he called the investigator again. Told him to check the address of the home personally. The response came quickly, but its tone was off, too calm, too rehearsed. A red flag. Everything seems normal here, sir. But Lila hasn't been at school this week. That single line echoed in Elijah's chest like an alarm. Without thinking twice, he canceled important meetings, ignored urgent emails, and got in the car. This time, he had to see for himself. When he arrived, he was met by a dirty, crumbling townhouse with cracked walls and a rusty iron gate that groaned at the slightest touch, a perfect reflection of the decay hidden inside. Inside, too many kids. Too quiet. Eyes too low to be okay. And adults that smiled too wide, masks of politeness barely concealing their unease. Good afternoon. I'd like to speak with Lila. He didn't waste time. Went straight to the point. Oh, she's sick. Got punished for a few days. Difficult kid, you know. The woman's voice was flat. Her stare cold. Her disdain barely hidden. Elijah didn't respond. His gaze did all the talking. He pushed past her and walked in. He moved through the dark, narrow hallways, ignoring objections and flimsy excuses, until he heard something that shattered him, crying. Faint. Nearly inaudible. The kind of crying someone learns to suppress to avoid punishment. He forced open a door. And there she was. Curled up on a thin mattress. No sheets. Arms wrapped tightly around her knees. Her eyes were hollow, scared, but deep in them, a flicker of hope. A flicker that had somehow survived the darkness. When she saw Elijah, she didn't speak. She just stared at him with that same silence that had once said everything. Her eyes said, "You came." Elijah dropped to his knees without a word. He opened his arms in quiet offering, something she had never been given, refuge. She hesitated for just a moment, then ran to him. Threw herself into his embrace like someone finally finding shelter after a storm. Like someone who, for the first time, had somewhere to belong. In the arms of a billionaire who had always had everything, except real love, Lila finally felt safe. "I thought you were going to forget me too," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't forget what matters," he answered, eyes glistening. "And you matter." Without hesitation, Elijah called his attorney. Formal complaints were filed immediately. And finally, they succeeded in removing Lila from that place. He had won the first battle. Temporary custody was granted. Elijah's mansion was quiet. Luxurious. Flawless. Reflective glass walls, polished marble, perfectly placed lighting. But despite all the elegance, it echoed with emptiness, a silence not even the most advanced tech could fill. Now Lila was there. Timid. Silent. As if apologizing for simply existing. She spent her days trying not to make a sound. Trying not to bother anyone. As if she expected, at any moment, to be told to leave. On her first night, she refused the big soft bed prepared just for her. She chose a corner of the couch instead, curled up beneath a thin blanket, hugging her knees, an instinct born from a life where she learned not to take up space. Elijah, a man used to negotiating with global powerhouses and handling astronomical figures, now found himself face to face with a quiet, fragile child, and didn't know what to do. He watched from a distance, feeling something unfamiliar grow inside him. He tried giving her toys. She didn't look. Left a tablet nearby. She picked it up, stared, and set it down again. On the third night, he gently placed a chocolate bar on the table. The next morning, it was still there. But beside it, a small note appeared. Messy, childlike handwriting. "Thank you. But my stomach is still scared." Elijah read those words like a verdict. That simple phrase hurt more than any failure, rejection, or loss he had ever experienced in business or life. Days passed. Lila began walking around the house. Barefoot, her steps touched the cold marble floors with delicate caution, like every step was an apology. She moved in silence, hiding behind curtains, staring out at the gray New York sky, at birds flying free, like she was seeing the world for the first time without fear. Elijah pretended not to notice. But he saw everything. Every curious glance. Every small motion. Every held breath. He sensed she was slowly learning to trust. One cloudy Sunday, as he passed by the kitchen, he found her sitting on the floor, drawing. The paper lay on the tiles, her knees tucked under her, colored pencils scattered around her like it was the only safe universe she knew. She was completely focused. So much so, she didn't notice she was being watched. When she finally sensed his presence, she froze. Her eyes widened instinctively, and she quickly hid the drawing behind her back like she'd done something wrong. Elijah crouched down slowly, approaching as if he were handling something far too precious to break. "You like to draw?" he asked, his voice soft, careful not to shatter the magic of the moment. Lila nodded, not saying a word. But in that small, silent gesture, there was something deep, something from a child who had rarely been encouraged to like anything. Later that same night, when Elijah went up to his room, he found something on his desk. It was her drawing. Folded with almost reverent care, like she was offering up a treasure. He opened it slowly. The drawing was simple, childlike. 2 stick figures holding hands. One tall, in a suit. The other shorter, wearing a dress with her hair tied back. In the background, a huge sun with a wide, smiling face. On the ground, colorful bracelets scattered like flowers. And in the corner, a short but powerful sentence, "I liked this day." It hit Elijah like a silent arrow. A day that might have seemed ordinary to the world, but to her, it was unforgettable. The first time in a long time something actually felt worth it. The next morning, the house felt different. The air was lighter. The silence, once heavy and suffocating, now seemed to breathe along with her. Something had shifted. Elijah noticed it the moment she walked into the kitchen. Lila was wearing an oversized hoodie that clearly wasn't hers, but she wore it like a hug. She held a mug in both hands, walking slowly, each step small and cautious. She stopped in front of him, looked straight at him, and said in a quiet but clear voice, "The coffee here is warm." Those were her first words, not written on paper. No notes. No middleman. Just her. Pure and direct. Elijah smiled. A small, gentle smile, full of surprise and affection. And then, it happened. She smiled back. Small. Brief. Careful. But real. And in that moment, time seemed to stop. The world slowed down. And a house that had been beautiful and silent for so long, finally came alive. After that, Lila's notes started to change. They weren't about pain or punishment or fear anymore. They were gentle declarations, full of childlike warmth. "Your couch is the comfiest I've ever slept on. I dreamed of a pretty place last night, and it was here. You look less serious when you hold your coffee with both hands." Elijah kept every single one of them like sacred relics. He didn't see them as pieces of paper, but as tiny miracles. Windows into her heart. More valuable than any contract he'd ever signed. Rarer than any jewel he'd ever bought. Because in them, there was truth. Healing. Transformation. She was slowly becoming a child again. Learning to trust again. And without even realizing it, she was transforming him too. Then came the moment Elijah would never forget. A quiet afternoon, the sun slowly pouring through the wide windows of the mansion. Lila appeared, shy as always, her tiny feet barely making a sound. She held a piece of paper, clutching it like it was her heart in her hands. "I made something else," she whispered. Elijah crouched down, curious and patient. She held out the drawing. It looked like the first one, but this time, it had life. The sun was bigger. The background more colorful. Flowers bloomed all around. And the 2 stick figures, they were smiling now. At the bottom of the page, in wobbly, colorful letters, it read, "Now I'm a girl who smiles." Elijah's heart clenched. He was speechless. There was nothing he could say that would match what she'd just given him. Nothing that could come close. Without thinking, he gently pulled her in for a hug. And she came. Without fear. She rested her head against his chest like someone who finally knows where she belongs. In that hug, there was no CEO. No billionaire. Just a man, and a little girl who learned, together, what love really is. That night, after Lila fell asleep, Elijah walked up to his office. He sat down in front of the giant glass window overlooking the glowing lights of Manhattan. The city sparkled as always. But inside, something had changed. Something no success, no tech innovation, no market trophy had ever given him. He picked up his phone. Dialed. And said with steady resolve, I want to start the adoption process today." On the other end, the lawyer hesitated. "Are you sure, sir? It's long, it requires." But Elijah cut him off. "I'm sure. And I'm willing to wait for everything. The only thing I'm not willing to do is lose her. Because Lila never asked for anything. But without knowing it, she gave him everything." And Elijah, a man who'd had everything money could buy, found in that forgotten little girl what money never could: belonging, love, truth. That day, when she smiled for the first time, he understood. Some moments aren't worth millions. They're worth a lifetime. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because here, every story has the power to change lives, just like Lila's did.